There is a specific kind of exhaustion that nobody really talks about. It is not the exhaustion that comes from doing too much or sleeping too little. It is the exhaustion that comes from a conversation that ended hours ago, but somehow never really ended at all. You said goodbye. You walked away. You got in your car, or you went back to your desk, or you lay down in your bed, and then it started. The quiet, relentless replay. The words you said running back through your mind in slow motion. The moment you paused a half-second too long before answering. The sentence that came out differently than you meant it to. The expression on their face that you cannot quite interpret no matter how many times you run it back. And somewhere underneath all of that replaying, a question you cannot turn off: did that go okay? Most people who experience this have been told at some point that they are too sensitive, too in their head, that they need to relax, let things go, stop caring so much about what other people think. And if you have heard that enough times, you may have started to believe it. You may have internalized the idea that this thing your mind does, this compulsive returning to conversations long after they are over, is a personal failing, a quirk to be managed, an anxiety to be overcome. But that framing is not just unhelpful, it is factually wrong. And understanding why it is wrong might be one of the most quietly relieving things you encounter today, because what is actually happening when you replay a conversation is not weakness. It is not insecurity in the way that word is usually meant. It is something far more specific, far more interesting, and far more deeply wired into the way certain minds are built. Post-conversation overthinking, the technical term researchers sometimes use, is post-event processing, is not random. It follows a pattern. It targets specific moments. It has a logic to it, even when it feels completely irrational. And the people who experience it most intensely are almost never the people you would expect. They are not, as a rule, the most fearful people in a room. They are often some of the most perceptive. Here is what the psychology actually shows. Your brain has a built-in negativity bias, a deeply ancient survival mechanism that causes it to weight negative information more heavily than positive information. This is not a flaw in the system. It is the system working exactly as it was designed. For most of human evolutionary history, the cost of missing a threat was death. The cost of missing an opportunity was merely disappointing. So your brain evolved to scan constantly for what could go wrong, to flag ambiguous information as potentially dangerous, and to return repeatedly to unresolved social situations until it felt it had extracted every possible piece of relevant data. A conversation that ended without clear resolution, without explicit confirmation that everything is fine, that you were liked, that nothing was damaged, registers to a certain kind of brain as an open file. And open files do not get closed. They get revisited. What neuroscience adds to this picture is even more clarifying. The brain region most associated with social processing, particularly the detection of social threat, is the amygdala. And in people who engage in high levels of post-event processing, research has found that the amygdala tends to remain activated well after a social encounter ends. The brain does not simply log the conversation and file it away. It keeps running it. It keeps evaluating it. It keeps looking for the thing it might have missed. And here's the part that most people never hear. This is not anxiety creating the overthinking. In many cases, the overthinking is the brain's attempt to resolve the anxiety. It is a coping mechanism, not a symptom. The mind is trying to achieve closure through analysis, because closure was not achieved through the interaction itself. And this is where the experience piece becomes essential. Because the question worth asking is not just what is happening neurologically, but why some people's brains learn to operate this way in the first place. The answer almost always traces back further than the conversation you are currently replaying. It traces back to environments, usually early ones, where reading other people accurately was genuinely important, where the emotional temperature of a room needed to be monitored carefully, where saying the wrong thing or misreading a situation had real consequences, not necessarily dramatic ones, but consistent, low-level ones that trained your nervous system to stay alert, to scan, to not relax until you were sure. For some people, that environment was a home where a parent's mood was unpredictable. For others, it was a social environment where belonging felt conditional. For others still, It was simply the accumulation of enough moments where they felt misunderstood, where their words were taken differently than they intended, where a relationship shifted after something they said, and they never fully understood why. What those environments created was not damage. What they created was a finely calibrated social nervous system, a brain that learned through repetition and necessity to pay close attention to the nuances of human interaction, the subtle shifts in tone, the micro-expressions, the pauses, the words chosen, and the words conspicuously avoided. A brain that learned that the surface of a conversation and the meaning beneath it are not always the same thing, and that paying attention to the gap between them matters. That is not anxiety. That is intelligence of a very specific and very undervalued kind. The replaying is not the sign of a mind that is broken. It is the sign of a mind that was trained to be thorough, and thoroughness in the right contexts is not a liability. It is one of the most quietly powerful things a person can be. But here's where it becomes important to be honest about the full picture, because holding only the flattering interpretation of a pattern does not actually help you understand it. The same sensitivity that makes you perceptive also makes you vulnerable to something that psychologists call the spotlight effect, the deeply human tendency to overestimate how much other people are focused on you, on what you said, on how you said it. The person you had that conversation with 3 hours ago has almost certainly not replayed it once. They moved on within minutes, absorbed back into the current of their own thoughts, their own worries, their own open files, while your mind has been running the interaction on a loop, examining it from every angle, constructing alternative versions of how it could have gone. They have probably already forgotten the specific words you were agonizing over. Not because the conversation did not matter, but because their brain was not built to hold it the way yours was. And this asymmetry is important to sit with, not because it should make you feel foolish, but because it reveals something true about the nature of this pattern. The overthinking is almost never really about the other person. It is about you, about your need to feel understood, to feel that you communicated accurately, to feel that the version of yourself that showed up in that interaction was received the way you intended. The conversation becomes a mirror, and what you are really examining when you replay it in the quiet of your own mind is not what they thought of you. It is whether you were truly seen, whether the real you, not the stumbling, slightly imprecise version that comes out under social pressure, but the full, complex interior version came through at all. That is a deeply human longing, and the fact that you feel it so acutely is not evidence of insecurity. It is evidence of depth. There is also a cost worth naming, because pretending it does not exist would be doing you a disservice. The cost of this kind of mind is presence. When you are in a conversation, a part of your processing power is already anticipating the replay, already watching yourself from a slight distance, already cataloging the moments that might become material for later analysis. This means that sometimes, in the very interactions you care most about, you are not entirely there. You are partially present and partially already in the car on the way home, running the preview of the review. And the painful irony is that this slight remove, this self-monitoring that kicks in precisely when connection matters most, can sometimes create the very ambiguity that feeds the overthinking afterward. You were not fully present, so the interaction felt slightly unresolved. So the replay begins, so the next time you are even more alert, even more self-monitoring, even less fully there. It is a loop that sustains itself, and seeing it clearly, really seeing it, without judgment is the first and most important step toward loosening its grip. Because loosening the grip does not mean becoming a different kind of person. It does not mean training yourself out of sensitivity or rewiring your nervous system to stop caring. It means understanding, at a level deep enough to actually feel it rather than just intellectually accept it, that the ambiguity you are trying to resolve through replaying almost never gets resolved through replaying. The analysis does not close the file. It keeps the file open. Every time you return to the conversation looking for the definitive answer about how it landed, you are reinforcing the neural pathway that says this situation is unresolved and requires more processing. You are teaching your brain that the way to feel better is to think harder, and the brain, being the obedient and adaptive organ that it is, will keep thinking harder, indefinitely, Because you keep asking it to. What actually closes the file? What the research on post-event processing consistently points toward is not resolution through analysis, but resolution through acceptance of uncertainty. The conversation happened the way it happened. It was received the way it was received, and the gap between what you meant and what was understood, if there even is one, exists outside your ability to collapse it through thinking alone. Some conversations are going to remain slightly open. Some moments are going to resist the clean interpretation your mind is searching for, and learning to let them stay open not with resignation, but with a kind of gentle, practiced trust that open is survivable, is one of the quieter and more profound forms of growth available to a mind like yours. You are not too much. You are not broken. You are not someone who needs to think less or feel less or care less about the quality of your connections with other people. You are someone whose nervous system learned, for reasons that made complete sense at the time, to treat social ambiguity as something that required resolution, and that learning served you. In the environments where it developed, it probably protected you in ways you are not even fully aware of. The work now, if there is work, is not to dismantle that sensitivity, but to update its understanding of what is actually at stake, to help your nervous system learn, slowly and through experience rather than instruction, that most conversations do not require a verdict, that most people are too occupied with their own inner weather to be judging yours, that being imperfectly understood is not the same as being misunderstood, and that the version of you that shows up, stumbling slightly, reaching for the right words, and not always finding them, that version is not the problem. That version is human. That version is, in its own unpolished way, exactly enough. If something in this felt familiar, if some part of you recognized itself in what we explored here, then there is likely more about the way your mind works that would feel equally clarifying. The patterns we carry rarely come alone. They arrive in constellations, and understanding one of them, really understanding it rather than just naming it, has a way of casting new light on all the others. That conversation is worth continuing,